As fantastic a CFP as Mel O is, as wonderful an attorney as I am, and as good as Stormy is at whatever it is he does, please do note that anything said in our podcasts are our opinions alone and are not meant to be taken as financial or legal advice.
Welcome to Finances, the Other F Word, a Gen Xer podcast for musicians and music lovers, where we discuss money and music without all the pretentious bullshit. Here are your hosts, Zoe Terry, attorney at large, Stormy Andrews, founder of Yokel Local Marketing, and Mel O, certified financial planner and author of Finances, the Other F Word. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey guys, welcome to Finances, the Other F Word. This is our second episode recorded in quarantine. How you doing, Zoe?
I'm hanging in there. Yes, I am recording from my bed. Lily and I are underneath the covers, keeping warm.
And that makes over 80 episodes where she successfully worked her cats into it. Great job. I hope everybody is living their quarantine pretty well. I was at the grocery store yesterday. They actually had meat out where you could buy it. And I picked up 2 pounds of ground beef to make a meatloaf. So I feel like I'm not hoarding. I feel like I'm doing pretty good, you know? How has your food intake been? Been eating good?
Yeah, I've been eating good, been cooking.
Been drinking?
Yeah. Actually, not too much, but I see that changing very soon.
Yeah, I think when I'm done with the day, I think I'm going to have one or two myself. I mean, why do I care? Where the hell am I going, right? I'm going to be home at my own house drinking. I can do that shit. So
you can do whatever you want.
I can do whatever I want in the privacy of my own house, I guess within reason, right? So we're going to be talking today about megachurches and why aren't they taxed? Now, kind of to set the stage for you, this is going to be a couple-part series, and I really have no idea how many parts it's going to be yet. It's just going to have to kind of shake out. We are, of course, Stormy-less again, because with the quarantine, it makes it very hard for us to try to come together, all three of us, to get the episodes recorded. So with this, as we're talking about megachurches and taxation, we want to give you guys a couple of, what would we call them? Like...
Disclaimers.
Disclaimers. Yeah. So I believe in God. Zoe is an atheist. We are both pro-choice. So, and the reason why we're telling you guys those disclaimers is because we're going to be having open discussion as we talk about this stuff. And I just want you guys to understand that we on Finances F Word don't care if you believe in God or if you do believe in God. It's irrelevant in the grand scheme of this conversation. This conversation that we want to have is when we're talking about these mega churches that are pulling in millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars and they're not getting taxed. Is that something that is worthwhile? Is that something that has any merit? Why is that? Because we all pay taxes. And of course, a lot of times when you...
Hallelujah.
Yeah. Yay, taxes. And anytime we talk, or anytime we go to any type of services, we are asked to donate. And if you do donate to a religious organization or a 501c3, then you do get a tax deduction on your taxes. It's above the line. It's a dollar for dollar deduction. And so those contributions are not taxable on your end, and they are also not taxable to the 501c3. And it is important for you guys also to note, to disclaim, even though we just had a disclaimer about this, Zoe and I are not CPAs. We are not giving tax advice. We are just trying to educate you guys and further discussion. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Yep.
Sounds good.
Okay. And then after all of this boring, dry stuff, we're going to talk about, Zoe has a deep dive into Losing My Religion by REM, which we thought would be a really good fit for our episode.
Right.
Yes. Okay.
Indeed. And I also went back and watched the video because the music video for the song, because I couldn't really remember it. And
Really? It won so many awards on the VMAs for that year.
I know, but I just was never really into the video. I loved REM, and I know you weren't a huge fan, but I just wasn't into the videos. I was more into the music. But anyway, we'll get there.
Yeah, and I love REM as musicians. They were a little, I don't even know if they would be considered new wave, a little alternative for me. But okay, so today on this episode of part 1 of our series, we're just going to look at what organizations are tax exempt, meaning that they qualify for 501c3 status. We're going to look at what the IRS considers those organizations to look at. And we're also going to look at what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do to maintain their 501c3 status. Okay. So this is going to be a little tough because this IRS, if you've ever been to the irs.gov website, which is where I got most of my information from, it is very difficult to read. They have a paragraph, I am assuming much like legal stuff, they have a paragraph and then they have all these words in it, but then all the words have links to the definitions of what they consider those words to be. So it's a lot of reading a paragraph and then finding a word and trying to see what it was what the description of it is, clicking on it, going and reading it to put it back in context to the main flow. It was quite frankly, it was a pain in the ass, but I was totally getting off on it because it's fucking exciting. So
because you're weird.
And no, I love it. It's so good. So just so you guys get context, because we might seem like our energy's a little down. It's like 1:50 in the afternoon on Friday. We're both sober. Zoe barely slept last night. I can tell because I'm looking at her on the screen, and I actually slept great.
Do I look almost translucent? I'm so pale.
Yeah, she's super pale, but her eyes are super red, like as red as the sweatshirt I'm wearing. So,
nice.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm going to try to make this exciting because this is actually going to get exciting, at least for me. Zoe I might have to wake her up halfway through it. But okay, so companies that are considered tax exempt would be churches and religious organizations, educational organizations, social welfare organizations, fraternities, societies, and associations, veteran organizations with at least 75% of its members serving or have served in the armed forces, trade associations that promote the common interests of its members, such as Chamber of Commerce's, labor organizations that promote interest of workers, such as work condition and wages, agriculture and horticultural organizations, including forestry, livestock, and crop, and then scientific organizations that research for public interest and make results available to the public. And so that's nice because, a lot of times they put church and science against each other, but we see as far as with the tax code, both of those are judged equally. And it's important that you realize that depending on the type of donation you give, sometimes your donation can be 100% deductible on your taxes. Sometimes it can be 50% deductible. Sometimes it could be 30% if it's not for use. And that's all stuff you should be asking your CPA. Please don't ask me because taxes are not my forte. I hate them just as much as everybody else. So let's look at just what the IRS considers a 501c3. So when you're talking about any type of religious organization, you are most commonly looking at a 501c3. And so when we're looking at these huge megachurches, we are looking at 501c3 organizations basically on steroids. So per the IRS, and this information was pulled right from the irs.gov website. I'm going to put all of the links that we used in today's podcast in the notes. So if you want to get off on reading IRS terms, what am I trying to think of? Like, not dogma, grammar. Why can't I ever fucking think of what I'm trying to say ever? Is my vocabulary really that bad? Probably it's mostly cuss words. That's probably why.
Yeah, if you could just insert a fuck instead of the actual word, and we'll just
move on. It's like did you guys watch the Smurfs over in England?
Yeah.
Yeah, where everything was Smurf. Like every other word was Smurf, and then it was like, let's go play Smurf ball or something like that. Mm-hmm. That's me with the F word. Okay, so per the IRS government website, I'm going to read you the paragraph that they use, and then I'm going to break down some terms of definition so that we can kind of understand. So this is verbatim per the 501c3 organization website on IRS. To be exempt under Section 513 of the Internal Revenue Code, an organization must be organized and operated exclusively for exempt purposes, set set forth in Section 501c3, and none of its earnings may inure to any private shareholder or individual. In addition, it may not be an action organization. It may not attempt to influence legislation as a substantial part of its activities, and it may not participate in any campaign activity or for or against any political candidates. Organizations described in 501c3 are commonly referred to as charitable organizations. Organizations described in Section 501c3 other than testing for public safety organizations are eligible to receive tax-deductible contributions in accordance with Code Section 170. Okay? And then it goes on to further say that the organization must not be organized or operated for the benefit of private interest, and that if the organization engages in any excessive benefit transaction with a person having substantial influence over the organization, an excise tax may be imposed on the person and any organization managers agreeing to the transaction. And the last thing I'll say, and then we're going to start breaking down some of these terms, is that according to the Section 501c3, organizations are restricted in how much political and legislative lobbying, in parentheses, activities they may conduct. For a detailed discussion, see political and lobbying activities. And so you guys don't have to do all that because I clicked through about 400 pages to do that. So the very first word as far as to understanding what actually makes a organization a 501c3 is that they cannot inure to any private shareholder. So according to the IRS, when you're talking about inuring, you're talking about that the organization cannot benefit private interests such as the creator or the creator's family, shareholders of the organization, or other designated individuals. So what that's saying is that you cannot be basically biased. You can't be rewarding the creator of the nonprofit. You can't be rewarding the family of the nonprofit. That if you're actually going to be a nonprofit, you need to be a nonprofit, and you can't run it like a private company, where Zoe and I have companies, and obviously it's for profit, right? So we're trying to make money, but we also pay taxes. And we also make, we pay taxes on everything we make. And so the first thing is that you cannot inure to a private shareholder, and you cannot award personal and private interest in the activities of the organization. So let's stop right there and let's think of a megachurch. And there's going to be a lot of names that we're going to bring up in the second series. Joel Osteen is the biggest one that's out right now. But in the past, we had Tammy and Jim Baker. We had Jimmy Swaggart. We had Billy Graham. We had Jerry Farewell. There's a whole bunch of these television evangelistic preachers that have been around for a long time that have these churches that are falling under the 501c3. And according to the IRS, that you cannot inure a certain amount of benefit to any private person, shareholder, family, creator, or creator of the family. Okay. Then it goes on to say that it says to any private shareholder or individual. In addition, it may not be an action organization. So an action organization, according to the IRS, is that it cannot use its money for legislative activities such as lobbying. And so basically there's two different ways that the IRS looks at this, and I'm not going to get into all of that, but what they're saying is they're saying that you cannot have a 501c3 and then try to in any way, shape, or form lobby or influence government, legislation, or anything. And to the extent even candidates, which we're going to see here in a minute. And it says it may not attempt to influence legislation as a substantial part of its activities, and it may not participate in any campaign activity for or against a political candidate. Okay. Now, when we're looking at this, we're looking at, and right now, I mean, obviously Trump is in office right now, and there is some evangelical support for Trump. And I tried to find some past Democratic presidents that had evangelical support. There are not really a lot of them, probably because of the pro-choice platform that many Democrats do have, and because of the LGBT, before it was legal to be married on the federal level for the LGBT community. Those are kind of going against traditional biblical values. And so we're going to have to just pick on Trump because he's the one that's in office, and this is what's happening right now. Next time a Democratic president gets in, if we need to revisit this and pick on them in the same way, we will. When you have evangelical preachers, right, come out and they're for a candidate, Republican, Democratic, or they like them and they support them or they endorse them because of their whatever pro-life values or whatever the case is. I mean, I don't know what you think, Zoe, but to me, that sounds that maybe you're not doing a direct lobby of the legislation, but you are supporting and you're endorsing. So if you have a megachurch and you have all of these people that listen to your services and follow what you say, and they are basically followers of your ministry, and then your ministry says, hey, we support this candidate, to me, that sounds like an action organization to some extent. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, of course it does.
And
me, but
yeah, and so the thing is, and that's why it's so great that you have both Zoe and I here, which is so great. But because of the fact that since you have somebody who does believe in God and somebody who is an atheist, it's good to actually get both sides of it. But just from an IRS standpoint, that to me says, okay, that I would assume that a megachurch or a preacher or something would be actually in violation of that from the IRS. Again, I'm not an IRS attorney. I'm just giving you my opinion from what I'm reading directly from there. And then the next thing it talks about is giving excessive benefit to a certain person. Now, there's a lot of stuff that the IRS website says about what they consider to be an excessive benefit transaction. And again, I'm not a tax person, nor am I a tax attorney. But some of the things that it does say is that it is talking about an excessive benefit of transaction where the general rule of thumb for the valuation of property, including the right to use property, is fair market value. Fair market value is the price at which property or the right of use property would change hands between a willing buyer and a willing seller, neither being under compulsion to buy or sell or transfer the property or right to use property. And it goes on to say, in regards to an excessive benefit can occur in exchange of compensation and other compensatory benefits in return for the services of a disqualified person. So there's a clause in the IRS code that talks about having excessive things as far as when you're talking to the 501c3. And now this is going to become a big deal as we look at in our second episode of this, where we start looking at some of these TV evangelists and the mega churches that have there and the actual compensation that they get. Sometimes they get compensation, sometimes it's actually in housing benefits. And we're going to talk a little bit about how the IRS looks at housing benefits. But there's certain things that the IRS basically lays out and says, this is the things that the 501c3s need to do if you want to maintain your 501c3 status. And then on top of it, if you do any of these other things where you excessively give money or you overcompensate for people or you favor one private member of the family or a creed over the other, then these are things that are going to get you in trouble with the IRS as a whole while maintaining your 501(c3) status. Now, when they're talking about campaign intervention, the IRS code is very specific with political campaign intervention and what it is. And this is important because you are disallowed anything that having to do, you are absolutely, per the IRS website, you are absolutely prohibited from directly or indirectly participating in or intervening in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for elected public office. And you can't give money to political campaigns, and you cannot, it goes on to further say, public statements of position, verbal or written, made on behalf of the organization in favor of or in opposition to any candidate for public office clearly violate the prohibition against political campaign activity. So now what we have is, when we're looking at these mega churches, is there excessive benefit in place to the creators and their families? Absolutely. Now, some of that can come from book royalties that they do pay taxes on. Some of that can come from other things, but that's something that we see a lot in the mega churches. That is a concern. We clearly see mega churches and or preachers come out that support one political person over another, whether it's because, again, they feel that they go against the biblical rights or whatever the case is. But the point is that we see this all the time. We see either evangelicals for you or against you, or we see unions for you or against you on a political basis. And when we're looking at what's kind of going on now, so for instance, when we're talking about everybody being in bed together and we're looking at these mega churches and the influence that they have and where we start to see the water get muddied between the two, So there was a article I found in USA Today, and again, I will be putting this up on as our resources, that in Miami at King Jesus International Ministry, which is a very large Hispanic megachurch in Miami, that Trump came and talked to the congregation. And several of the evangelical leaders put their hands on the President Trump and prayed for him. Okay. Now that in itself is not a big deal, right? Like, I mean, I could put my hands on Zoe and pray for her. Doesn't make me a pastor.
I would let you though.
Doesn't also
touching me and praying for me, bitch.
it also doesn't make me a 501c3 though. Okay. No. That's the difference here. But in this, they compared him to, as he prayed that Trump would fulfill his role as the new King Cyrus. So in the Old Testament, the Persian ruler who released all the Jews from captivity and then allowed them to rebuild Jerusalem. Now, that's where, in my opinion, it starts getting a little bit muddy, because it's one thing to put your hands on somebody and pray for them. It's another to pray in front of your mega congregation that's a 501c3 that your presidential candidate is going to be comparative to somebody in the Bible who allowed the Jews to rebuild their faith in a evangelical Christian church. Are you feeling what I'm putting down? So, and as Trump took the podium, some of them were wearing pro-Trump stuff, and hey, that's okay. You can wear whatever the fuck you want to. You want to wear a MAGA hat all the time? Do it. You want to wear a t-shirt that says you hate Trump? Wear that too. I have no problem with that. But as he took the stand in this church, the congregation started chanting USA, USA, USA. And that's where I have a problem. It's not the fact that it's Trump versus Hillary or Trump versus Biden. It's not even the fact that it's Trump at all. It's the fact that these mega churches are making tons and tons of contributions from people like us who are paying taxes on that money. And then, of course, depending on how you contribute it, you're going to get a deduction from the IRS. And they're starting to blur the lines between what they can get away with. And when we're looking at a time where they just passed today the federal stimulus package to help us at the time of our quarantine, which I think had a price tag I saw of $2 trillion. We'll be releasing an episode later today that talks about what that consists of. That's great, you guys, right? I mean, a lot of us our incomes are severely cut. A lot of people, specifically in Vegas, with the fact that they can't get tips and so forth and so on, is a big deal. And their wages have been significantly cut. But when we're talking about a stimulus package, where the fuck is that going to come from? Us. It's going to come from us. It's going to come from the taxpayers. They're not going to create new money. I mean, so when you're talking about these major, like we talked about it before, Amazon paying no income taxes, or I'm sorry, not income taxes, paying no taxes. And then when we're talking about these mega churches that are not subject to the same IRS rules we are, that's when it becomes a problem. And so then the Supreme Court weighed in on this decision as far as the fact if churches should be actually taxed or not. And this is, I'm going to read you kind of verbatim what they basically said, and Zoe probably is more familiar with some of this language than I am. But it says that if you tax churches, then you are going to be hindering the freedom of religion. And if there is a freedom of religion, you can, in essence, find a group of religious people you don't like, and you can tax them out of the system. So let's say, for instance, Jewish people. So they were a big target during World War II with the Nazis. So obviously, hopefully nothing like that ever happens again. But what was to say if you were to start being able to tax churches, that you couldn't target one specific group, a religious group, and basically tax them out of existence? And so Supreme Court basically says, hey, you can't do that, because by taxing the churches, you're actually going to mix church and state more so than allowing them to have tax exempt status. So in its opinion in 1970, Waltz versus the Tax Commission, the city of New York, the high court said that the tax exempt churches creates only a minimal and remote involvement between church and state, and far less than taxation of churches. And then it says an exemption restricts the fiscal relationship between church and state and tends to complement and reinforce the desired separation, insinuating insulating each other from the other. So this is the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court goes on to farther say that the power to tax involves the power to destroy. So that's the reason why. So we have what the IRS says a 501c3 is, and what you have to do to meet those qualifications. And then we see what the Supreme Court says, the reason why they're not actually going to allow these mega churches and churches and other religious places of worship or just other 501c3s, why they're not going to allow them to be taxed. Now, this is going to lead into our second episode when we're talking about pastoral income. Okay. Now, Joe, it is from my preliminary research, it is saying that Joe Osteen, is it Joel or Joe? Joel, I think it's Joel Osteen, actually does not pull a salary from his church, but he gets a living allowance, and he could get travel benefits and all of these other things that fall within that ability to basically sustain a lifestyle without having maybe actually a salary. And so that's going to become important. And when we're talking about the IRS and we're looking at pastoral income, it says a minister's housing allowance, sometimes called as a parsonage or a rental allowance, is excluded from gross income for income tax purposes, but not from self-employment tax purposes. So it's not at the ordinary income tax level. It is excluded from that. So basically the housing allowance, or like I said, any of the other benefits that you get are the things that we're seeing that are excluded. And so that's kind of how the IRS looks to the 501c3s. And when we're exploring this conversation about the different guidelines, and are the mega churches, are they actually still considered exclusively 501c3s? And I don't want to get so much in the discussion of, the mega church does all this good stuff, or my local church does all this good stuff. I want to focus on the fact that, are you maintaining the stipulations of the 501c3 guidelines in order to keep your tax exempt status? So while the court system is saying, hey, we don't want to mix the two, I get that part. But if you're going to be giving tax exempt status to somebody, then they have to fall within the regulations, in my opinion, if they're going to keep the privilege of the tax exempt status. And so we've looked at the guidelines of what it is to have a 501c3 per the IRS conditions. And then we've looked at some of the things that will exclude you from being a 501c3. And so when the IRS is looking at pastoral income, there's different allowances that you can get. You can get home allowances and you can get actual salaries, and those are taxed differently. If it's a home allowance or if it's a patronage, how it's sometimes called, those can be exempt from taxation, where actually a physical salary to the pastor is still considered taxable. So in the case of my preliminary research on Joel Osteen, I found that he doesn't specifically pull a salary from the church, but he does get benefits from the church. And that's all the stuff that we're going to look at in the second episode. And I know that this is a lot of information, guys, and I know it might seem a little bit boring, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to set it up for you guys to understand the fact that, to really have a good discussion on what these mega churches count as being taxable or not.
Right. and whether they should be,
right,
or not.
Oh, absolutely. And it's hard for me, because I believe in God, and I do believe that there's a lot of good that the churches do. Do I feel that they do enough good for the benefits that they get? And again, we're not focusing on your little tiny local church that's basically looking to get enough donations to keep the lights on. We're talking about mega fucking churches that bring in millions and millions of dollars. And I have really mixed feelings on this, because at one hand, I think that this tax exempt status does help the smaller churches, and they can do good in the community, specifically times like now where there's quarantine going on and things like that. But then you can't have one without the other, right? You can't say, oh, little churches are tax exempt, but mega churches aren't. You have to kind of do it, paint it all one color.
I don't know. I think you probably could. I think you could have tax exempt status for certain sized churches, but once you get to a certain fucking size, like the Mormon church, for example, that own millions and millions of dollars of real estate.
And so does the Vatican. I mean, the Catholic religion as well. They're in the same situation. They have tons of real estate. And so then let me ask you this, as an atheist, would you be okay with a tax law that says mega churches are taxed, but little guys are okay? Like, does that bother you, or is anyone less bothersome than the other?
I've never really thought about it in any kind of depth. I can see the good, as you said, that some churches do, but I think they should all be taxed. I don't see why there should be tax exemptions for the churches. For other charities, of course, but
so like for Pause, for example.
Sure,
absolutely.
That's different. That's different.
So
you don't have to. There's no philosophical question about whether a cat is a cat or a cat needs a home. Whether and you can donate or not donate. But
so for you think that little churches and big churches should be taxed equally.
Religious organizations should be.
So if there was a tax code that came out that did how you had previously mentioned about, hey, from a church this size and down gets tax exempt status and a church from this size and up doesn't, would that be more palatable for you, or do you think it should be all or nothing?
I think it should probably be all or nothing, but then just like any business, the amount of tax is going to depend on the income. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So why shouldn't it be that way for a religious organization?
So then I wonder, like if you have what some of the other organizations that we had mentioned at the top of this, and let me go back up there so I can look at them. So when we're looking at, and I think, I don't know, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I think that probably the situation would be for like social welfare organizations or fraternities, societies, and associations. So like, let's say if, you're in college and you have beef with this fraternity over that fraternity, or maybe the person in the White House is an alum from one fraternity over the other. It would kind of be like you saying, well, I was a Phi Beta Kappa. I don't even know what that is. But I think it was in a Revenge of the Nerds movie, or Delta.
And see, we don't have fraternities and sororities in England either. So that, that means nothing to me also.
Okay. Well, yeah. So they're big here. Did you ever see any of the Revenge of the Nerds movie?
Yeah. I mean, I know what they are, but the thought that they're tax exempt also is fucking beyond me. So.
Yeah, I mean, and it would be, I think that the problem with trying to be specific with different churches or different religious organizations that should pay taxes or not would be, this is a very weak argument, but I'm just trying to kind of show a comparison that if, like I said, if you had an alumni in the White House that was a Phi Beta Kappa person and they didn't like Delta Phi, I don't fucking know anything that I'm saying right now. I'm just throwing a whole bunch of Greek words out there. And, could they say, oh, you support this and we don't, we support this, and then therefore could it kind of muddy the waters? And that's probably the reason why the mega churches and the smaller churches are still tax exempt. But it still begs a question, your local church that is tax exempt, even if the pastor from the pulpit says, hey, I like this guy for president, or I think this person exudes whatever, you're not going to have as much influence. You might have influence over maybe 50, 60, 200 people, maybe 400 people at one service, but you're not going to have the reach of these mega churches who have 52,000 attendees a week and listeners on the radio station and listeners on television. I think that's where I have the biggest problem.
Well, my biggest problem is just that they're tax exempt at all. In general. In general.
And so from that, we will be picking up this conversation in our second episode, where we actually look at the net worth of many of the highest paid TV evangelical pastors and preachers, and we keep exploring what exactly benefit are they getting from the church. And so thought it would be a good idea to do a deep dive into Losing My Religion by REM. Seems kind of appropriate. And so Zoe has that. So now we can talk about fun stuff, and I'll turn it over to Zoe.
So REM's Losing My Religion was their first single from their 1991.
You sound so unenthused.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you're like, so REM. You guys should see, because I'm seeing her as she's speaking. So not only am I hearing her unenthusiasm, I'm seeing it in her face. She's very, very tired. Are you wearing a bra?
God, yes. Look.
Oh, okay. That's a very pretty bra.
I not wear a bra. They would be like down on the floor somewhere.
I'm not wearing a bra.
Oh my goodness.
Do you want to see?
No, I don't want to see your boob. Oh my Lord, Bob. Just flash me her boobies.
Yeah, sober.
It's with 2 weeks into the quarantine, and Mel O has flashed me her titties.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'll show you.
All right,
pussy.
Little more. I've seen Lily many times. Yes. All right, a little more enthusiasm, Zoe.
No. Woohoo! Oh yeah.
I'm keeping the boobs in there, by the way.
Who I did like a lot, although Michael Stipe is so up his own ass, it's unbelievable. So Losing My Religion was the first single from their 1991 Out of Time album. Losing My Religion is in fact a Southern expression, so you may know it, meaning losing one's temper or civility, or feeling frustrated or desperate, or at the end of one's rope.
Much like Zoe feels right now talking about the tax exempt status of churches. Boom! Look at that. Took it all the way around. Just boom.
Yeah. Indeed. And as we all know, the song has the famous mandolin riff that's and a critically acclaimed music video, and was the highest charting hit of REM, reaching number 4 in the US Billboard charts.
Really, more so than like obviously Everybody Hurts. Was that off of this? What was the name of the CD this was off of?
Out of Time.
Out of Time. Oh, okay, no, so they're on 2 different CDs. Okay.
Mike Mills, REM's bassist, says that song was the closest to a life-changing event in their career. Their label at the time, Warner Brothers, was against even releasing it as a single because it was written in a minor key, which very few hit songs are. Hotel California was, apparently. And also because it appeared to question faith, which was not
the intention. Mm-hmm.
Although that isn't what they were doing and wasn't the intention, but that was what some people thought it was. So the guitarist Peter Buck wrote the song while he was watching TV, fiddling around with his mandolin, trying to teach himself to play it with a tape recorder on. And when he listened to it the next day is when he realized that he had a potential. Was that a bless you?
No, that was a cough. Oh. But I'm in the privacy of my own home, so nobody can point to me, and and it was a dry cough. Oh no!
Oh dear!
Oh
no! So he listened to it the next day and realized that he had something quality. And Michael Stipe then wrote the lyrics and nailed his vocals in one go at the studio.
Wow!
Yeah. Apparently shirtless, did it in one go.
Shirtless? Why was he shirtless?
I don't know. He liked to get himself bare and out there, didn't he, though, Michael Stipe? He was all...
And see, guys can just, like for a guy can walk down the street right now with no shirt on.
Honey, you just bared your boobies
to me. Yes, but to you.
With very little encouragement.
We've shared a lot.
No encouragement.
We've shared a lot. She encouraged me. You guys couldn't see it because she was mouthing it to me.
Oh, yeah. I was, get your tits out, boy.
I don't know how we can go from talking about religion and believing in God to flashing boobs, but welcome to Finances, the Other F Word, guys.
I know. Anything can happen, and usually does. So, according to Michael Stipe, the lyrics were about unrequited love and obsession. So, nothing about religion, but we've already established that. So the video was, like I said, I just went back and rewatched it because I didn't remember it, but I remember it now. It was inspired by a short story by the author of A Thousand Years of Solitude, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. The short story was called A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. And Michael Stipe was a big fan of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And in the video, you see Michael Stipe lip syncing for the first time, which he'd previously refused to do. And there's very biblical imagery, very colorful imagery. You probably remember it. And
right.
The angel wings and lots of beautiful, colorful imagery. And then in contrast, you have him, Michael Stipe, sat on the floor and sat on a chair, and then doing his, erratic dancing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was very, very, it played all the time on MTV.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember when I watched something or I read something and they were talking about that, just like what you said, that he was doing the erratic dancing. And literally I was like, that was dancing? Like, I thought he was just doing it to just kind of occupy space within the video. I mean, if you guys have got to see it again on YouTube, he's like pacing back and forth at some point, and then he's like flailing his arms, but he's not flailing his arms in time with the music. Like, he's just like he's on a different time in his head, and the music's playing, and I didn't know what the fuck he was doing. Then when they said he was dancing, I was like, what?
Yeah, apparently he was very hot and bothered, and the person who was directing the video was getting frustrated because it wasn't working out, and so apparently Michael suggested that he do some dancing.
And, no.
Yes, and that's the outcome. Michael Stipe came to the rescue with his dancing.
Wow.
So there you go. But as I said, it was the biggest hit of their career. They won a Grammy in 1991. And some have said that's kind of when they sold out, became kind of mainstreamy. But I don't know. It's not my favorite song of theirs, but I liked them. And yeah, that's losing my religion. It's feeling frustrated at the end of your rope. I'm sure we can all fucking relate.
Absolutely, especially this with our time in quarantine and whatnot. And I would take a gander, and I would assume that we will probably be recording the next episode in the series in the same situation, staring at each other through Skype, maybe topless. I don't know. We'll see if Zoe's feeling a little crazy, a little weird, get a little weird in here. And we'll talk about the evangelical net worth and where the bulk of their money has come from, and we'll kind of further the discussion on if the activities are going to be taxable or not. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this one now is because I was reading an article in Forbes. So we're under quarantine, and there was an article that came out in Forbes that had a whole bunch of CEOs from different companies. One of them was one of the Fertittas that owns the Station casinos here in Las Vegas, and they were talking about that basically Trump had came out and said, I think it was Monday of this week, the week of this recording, that he wanted to have the U.S. economy up and rolling and open by Easter, which I believe is April 13th of this year.
Oh, God. Because it's a beautiful timeline. It's a beautiful timeline. And then we can all be in the pews at Easter in our bonnets.
Well,
That's true.
And so it's interesting you say that, because of course Easter is the biggest holiday in the Christian faith, and if you will be playing to any type of bass, of course opening it on Easter would have a very specific effect. And my thing is this: is that let me go back to the Forbes article. So the Forbes article basically had CEOs that came out, and all of them were saying something along the lines of, "Hey, we need to have some people go back to work, because if we keep the economy closed, everybody's going to go bankrupt and we're going to crash the economy." And a couple of the CEOs that were quoted had basically alluded to, if people die, then some people are just going to die. Some people are going to get sick. And when I read that, I was kind of like, fuck you. But then I was like, yeah, I get it, because from and this is where my job gets challenging for me from an economic standpoint. Absolutely. Some people aren't going to get sick. Some people are going to have an immunity of some type. And so from an economical standpoint, if there was a way that we could weed out those people and put those people back to work to keep the economy going, to keep somebody in the household working and bringing in income and buying things, since we know that our economy is based specifically on, not specifically, but majority on consumer spending, then that would make a lot of sense. I think where the problem with the whole thing comes in is you have somebody who's, worth like the Fertitas, worth, I don't know, millions and millions, if not, $1 billion between that family. And they are actually paying a lot of the people here through, actually, no, that's not true. I'm sorry. They are paying some of their employees here, not all of their employees. And for them to come out in an article in Forbes and say, hey, some of you guys are just going to have to come back to work. And if you die, you die. It's kind of like you're worth fucking millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. You can't fucking afford to pay your people for a certain amount of time until this blows over, and then have it so that they can stay home and they can stay quarantined, but they can still pay their bills. But you want them to get back to work, because I guarantee you, they're not putting themselves at risk. Like any of these CEO people, they're not going to be putting themselves at risk. And I think that's where the disingenuous, hopefully I'm using that word right, comes into play. So when we're talking about pastors and we're talking about megachurches and we're talking about people who are saying that they are believers in God and that they're going to go out and they're going to go do good and they're going to help all these people, and then you see some of their actions and you see the way that they live and the lifestyles that they live, it's a hard disconnect. So when you CEO worth, millions and millions and millions of dollars and, saying that little guys should go back to work, it's a very big disconnect. And that's where the problem of it lies. And unfortunately, with the way that the IRS tax code is written right now, there is no distinction between it. But I think that's the reason why it gets under our skin so bad. And that's why at this time, when I read that Forbes article, I was like, yes, this is what we need to talk about. And it's a very complex subject. And we're going to do our best, hopefully, to entertain you and give you guys some just things to think about in general.
And I just want to mention that I don't know what station it was on, what channel it was on, but I saw one of these evangelical, preachy weirdos shown on TV, and he was, your typical, he looked like he had a bunch of plastic surgery, leathery skinned weirdo, sweating into the camera, putting his hand on the camera, curing people, telling people to put their hand onto the screen and he would cure them of the coronavirus. And then in the same breath telling people not to stop tithing. It doesn't matter if you aren't working right now. Do not stop tithing, because the Lord is a judging. And it's stuff like that. All of that just makes
it hard for you to digest. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, don't listen to the crazies. Just do what you're supposed to do. Stay home if you can. And if you can't, then be safe.
Yep. Be safe. And I think that will wrap this up. I feel like this has been a very depressing episode. We had a whole bunch of IRS talk at the beginning. Then we talked about losing my religion was a great song. So that part was great. And then now we
Michael Stipe's hardly Mr. Uplifting, is he?
Well, and him and Kurt Cobain really liked each other. I mean, they were like really close friends. So, Kurt Cobain was a big REM fan. So, anyway, this has been an up and down kind of a peak and valley type episode, but we hope you guys are enjoying yourself in quarantine. Thank you for listening.
And I did get to see Mel O's peaks, so
they were amazing. All right. So we'll pick this up again, next week. We'll talk to you guys later.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening. If you like us, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.